Right guys, today we're going to be doing a 1UZ non-VVTi into an IS200 plug and play harness, and this is designed for a Link ECU. So let's get into it. Right, so as discussed, this is a 1UZ non-VVTi plug-and-play harness into an IS200. Now, it is designed for a Link ECU, but what we've done with this particular harness, it's a new one that we've designed, and it's actually able to work with either a Storm or an X-Treme. So what I mean by that is that in this case, the customer's opted for a Storm ECU G4X, but he could quite happily tomorrow unplug the Storm and plug in an X-Treme, and all the wires for each ECU is built into the main harness, okay? As it is a brand new harness, as per usual, we're going to go through the build process now, show you some photos of what that looks like. So let's do that and we'll come back in a second.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life, I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light, ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel?
Right, so now you know what it looks like and all the pulses that goes through there. This is a modular harness, so you'll see a couple of the little sub-harnesses in those photos as well, all right? But what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the layout of the harness. I'm going to explain some things in detail for you guys and more so for the customer so he knows how everything is routed and where everything goes. Once we've gone through the layout, then what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the testing portion, and that's made up of two sections. One with just the ignition on, we'll carry out a couple of tests there, and then obviously we're going to start the engine up so we can test everything there as well. All right, so starting with the layout, we're going to start right here inside the ECU box. So as you can see, the Link ECU just slots right into the case there, no problem at all. Obviously, I've got my data cable linked in there to the laptop, but you've got your two connectors there. And again, they are keyed, so you can't put the wrong one into the wrong one. So that is absolutely fine. We then got our little MPX analog device. So that's helping us translate some data for the gauges via the MPX communication system. We then have our little patch harness section, and that plugs into your 22 and 28 pin plug that is left behind in the vehicle. So that's what I call the body ECU plugs over there. So they interface with the harness nicely. Lastly, we've got our blue plug over here, we've got our gray body plug over there, and we've got our black plug over there. Okay, so that's all the interfaces there. Now what we also have is a little junction connector, and that does slot literally right into this empty cavity here on the white frame. That should be empty because this formed part of your original IS200 harness. Next up, we've got our expansion plug. Okay, now because the harness is designed for a Storm and an X-Treme, not all the wires in the expansion plug are available to each ECU, and I'll go through the different variations as we go along the other layout of the harness there. Okay, so there's an expansion plug, but unfortunately only one is able to be used with the Storm, and all six will be able to be used with the X-Treme. Okay, lastly, we've got this little relay here. Now obviously this is for the ETCSI, electronically controlled throttle system. Link require you to have a relay to control the power to the ECU. Now obviously the Storm doesn't support drive-by-wire, so in this particular case this is actually not being used, but we do have to put it in there because otherwise it won't be capable of running the X-Treme. Okay, so that's everything inside the ECU box. You've then got your nice little grommet over there, which will slot directly into this little section of your ECU box over there. Okay. At the end of this, we have our first breakout point, and that is going to go to this little harness subsection that we designed to basically run up along here and down into there. Now what we have in here is we've got a CAN plug. In this case, it's blanked off because the customer isn't having any CAN devices, but it is in there for you. Okay. And then we also have a fuel plug. Now it is 4-pin. Now just a caveat, the Storm doesn't have the second temperature or the extra temperature sensor you need for fuel temp. So in a Storm, this is basically only capable of using a fuel pressure sensor. In an X-Treme, it's capable of using not only a pressure but a temperature sensor as well. Okay. In this case, they're both blanked off because the customers haven't opted for those particular sensors. But again, they can be added at any time. So that's a little add-on there for you guys as well. Then it's going to come along over here. Now usually obviously the engine would be down, it would come out the ECU box, pop over to the top over here, and then it's going to split into 2 sections. All right, we're going to go down the front here so we can go there, then we'll come back and then we'll go around the back over there. So the first section that splits up comes down here. You have a breakout here which goes to the cam sensor there. Now in this particular case, we are not using the cam sensor on this one. We're only using the cam sensor on this one over here. Okay, so when you guys are doing it, you can actually remove that cam sensor completely if you want, or you can just leave it in place. Right, obviously the harness carries on along there. You'll see you have a mounting point on the metal bracket over there, so you can clip it down to keep it out of the way. It then comes down towards the bottom here, and you can see we have another breakout section over there where it breaks out into 3 pieces. Okay, the first section is the main one that pops down, goes through that hole over there, down through there, and into your crank sensor. Okay, so that's nice and simple. And as per usual, everything is labeled for you guys, so it should be relatively straightforward to get it all plugged in. The second section that pops over there comes down through there and pops into this 6-pin DTM plug. Okay, so basically this is capable of having oil switch, which is what we've got here, just the standard oil switch over there. Also capable of having oil pressure and temperature. Okay, and obviously that depends on which ECU you go for. Okay, well actually sorry, the Link Storm has the oil temp because it's got temp 3. So we are able to put an oil pressure and temperature sensor on this one, just not the fuel temperature when you have the Storm instead of the X-Treme. Next up is obviously the aircon. So it's just a straightforward single little plug over to here, and that is going to plug directly into your aircon, and the aircon is being controlled via the ECU. Okay, so that's relatively straightforward. So those are your 3 plugs that come down over here, plus your cam sensor at the top over there. All right, so now what we're going to do, come back to our breakout point over here, and then the harness just splits and goes around, down along there. There's no breakouts along here until the very end over there. Okay, I'm going to pop around here, because I've got all these cables in the way. Right, so you've got a nice big breakout at the end over here, and there are quite a few things over here, so we're going to spend a bit of time here going through everything. So first of all, what we do have is our injector sub harness. Okay, so you can see everything is labeled injector there. It's a 12-pin DTM plug over there, and that brings all the injectors underneath there, and then brings them out over here to plug into the injector. So it makes all the injectors a complete separate sub harness. So again, if you ever want to change the injectors, just a case of phoning us up, telling us what injector connectors you need, and we'll send you out a new harness, unplug your old one, plug in your new one. Okay. Next up with that is your throttle plug. Now that's also a 12-pin plug. Okay, so you guys need to make sure that you do read the labels on there and make sure you connect everything correctly. Now, obviously in this case, the customer's remaining with a pretty standard setup, so he's only using a TPS, and he's using his 6-wire stepper motor for idle control at the front there. Okay, now as I said earlier, we have already put in all the wiring required to swap over to a drive-by-wire setup if you want to. Okay, I know it's getting popular now to swap with the Bosch drive-by-wire throttles, etc. So this customer could literally phone us up, he could buy an X-Treme ECU, and we could send him out another throttle harness there that would incorporate a drive-by-wire throttle. Okay, also obviously you can change it if you want to change the idle control valve to like a Ford idle control valve. It's absolutely no problem. You just phone us up and we'll make you a new sub harness, and you can change all of that over there. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you, because obviously these two go under the inlet manifold there. I've got some nice photos of what it looks like underneath, so I'm going to show you those now. And you can see how it goes right along the middle, and then it pops out either side for the injectors, and in the case of the idle air control valve, goes straight forward to the front, and the TPS pops out there to go to the TPS. Okay, right, so those are those 2 plugs over there that come out the back. Next up, we've got our sub harness. So again, this is the one going under the intake. It goes to the knock sensors and the starter solenoid. And as per usual, we've already wired up the ability to have wideband Bosch knock sensors. So there are twin core shielded cables come into this 8-pin plug over here. So again, in this case, the customer's just using the standard knock sensors because they're staying naturally aspirated. But if you were going to go turbo and all of that, we could then send you out a sub harness. We also can supply you with the Bosch knock sensors and the studs and nuts in order to fit them as well. Okay. As this is an IS200 plug and play, we have added all the gearbox wiring. So in this case, they're using a J160 gearbox, but we've added on a separate sub harness so you guys can swap around. Sometimes you start with a J160, end up with an R154, or maybe even switch over to a BMW. Again, absolutely no dramas. You can phone us up and we can supply you whatever sub harness you need in your particular application. So this one is going to be straightforward. Right, so there's your reverse plug and your speed plug is over there, and we'll go through the testing as part of that. Okay, so that's that over there. Next up is just your ground. There's only one ground in this harness and it's going to bolt directly to the M8 hole in there. Okay, make sure that's nice and clean on the aluminium there. Give it a wipe over with the emery cloth before you bolt this down. All right. Next up is our ignition sub harness for the left bank. So you can see that plugs straight in, tucks away in there, and that is going to a set of Audi coils over there. Okay, so again, they completely plug in straight. So when you want to service the car, and effectively what you can do is unplug this and pull all of these coils out without having to do each connector itself. Put that harness on the side with the coils, change the spark plugs, put it all back again. Furthermore, if you want to change from Audi coils to R35 coils to Denso coils, whatever you want, you just phone us up and we can make you a sub harness that plugs directly into there. No dramas there, not having to make any changes at all. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scoot around and we're going to go over to the other side now and we're going to carry on with the harness over there. Right, so you can see this little section of the harness carries on along here and then it splits out towards the back here. Okay, and out the back here, we've got our coil harness for the right bank. So again, that pops into there, and underneath here, there's obviously 4 Audi coils over there. Now, as we have allocated the ability to swap to drive-by-wire, we've also allocated the ability to put an electronic pedal in, okay? And this case is obviously blanked up because the customer's not using drive-by-wire, they're using a Storm, and they're going to be using standard throttle. So this is blanked up, so the customer can just tuck this away neatly in there, and at any stage, if he does want to do drive-by-wire, he can phone us up, swap the ECU, swap the throttle harness, and we can send him a harness to put an electronic pedal inside the vehicle. Obviously, that means that this harness is designed for a right-hand drive. Obviously, we do them for left-hand drive as well. So if you want a left-hand drive version, the pedal plug will just come out the back over there to go to the pedal over there. Okay. Next up is your map sensor. So in this particular case, as the customer staying naturally aspirated, we've supplied a 1.15 bar link map sensor. Again, it is about a 30 centimeter long harness. So this is designed basically to plug into the firewall. We don't normally advise fitting map sensors onto an engine. Obviously the vibrations can play with the diaphragm inside there and get inaccurate readings. So again, I always advise it's more beneficial to mount it onto the firewall and then run your vacuum hose over to the back of the inlet manifold. You've got a nice hole there if you want to use that one that is for the brake booster. Normally, if you don't require a brake booster vacuum, again, there's loads of places on this engine that you can get a vacuum source from. Okay. Second of all, don't ever tap in your map sensor vacuum to anything else. So don't take one line, run it, put a T-piece on and take one to your fuel pressure regulator and one to your map sensor. Always make sure these have a clean, dedicated vacuum line to the inlet manifold with nothing else tapped on them. Again, same principle applies. Other items can cause vibrations, which can mess around with the diaphragm, which would then cause incorrect readings. Okay, so always make sure one dedicated vacuum hose from the inlet manifold to the map sensor. Okay, now then the harness carries on along here. Obviously the injectors are popping out of that harness which runs through the middle there, which you saw earlier, but the harness carries on along here and then it breaks out at the front, because remember your TPS plug is also coming from underneath there, but it breaks out here at the front to go to a gauge temp. So again, this is the standard 1UZ non-VVTi gauge temp sensor. This is what we're using for the dash, and then you've got your coolant temp sensor over there, and that's what we're using for the ECU. Okay. Also coming out of here, we have a breakout to an intake air temperature sensor. Again, obviously, so you guys can change around if you need to. You can also lengthen and change it depending on what the situation is. If you went turbo, if you needed to flip the intake manifold around or anything like that, all of these things can be swapped around to accommodate whatever you guys could possibly do. Okay, and that at the moment is popping out to an intake air temperature sensor that we are going to be supplying with a mounting boss for the customer. So this is what they are going to get with this particular harness. Right, the last section that breaks out down there is going to go down, 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 and that is to your alternator. So as per usual, we've done our sub harness for the alternator. This will then allow you, in this particular case, they have the older style round plug. They could always swap it out for the newer style oval one. So if that alternator were to fail and they could only get a newer oval style one, they can just phone us up. We can make them a new sub harness for the oval style connector. as well as obviously if they wanted to go really fancy with the new 4-wire ones from the much later Toyotas, same story, we could just do that. You just have to be careful which one you get. It would have to be from something like a GS or an LS, very last generation. Those have the 4-wire ones, but they only use the 3 out of the 4 wires, so those are perfectly acceptable to be swapped around with one of these. Okay, right, so that is basically the entire harness layout. So hopefully that's nice and simple and easy to install. And obviously I showed you what it looks like in the middle of the intake there earlier, so you have a good visual representation of that. All right, now what else do you need to connect? Now in this case, you need to connect your main starter cable. So you can see I've got a temporary one in here, one that we have just lying around in the workshop. That's going to go from your starter all the way to the positive side of your battery. You also need to connect your alternator. So you need your main alternator cable. So you saw earlier there was a bolted cable on there, and that is going to run to your fuse box over there. That is where the alternator is designed to plug in. You'll see there's a 120 amp alternator fuse in there, and that is why. So if anything goes wrong with this wire, that fuse will pop and you don't have a short onto the chassis. All right. Next up is grounds. So the grounds, the standard grounds on the IS200, you can bolt in. So you've got the one that goes from the negative of the battery, underneath the battery, bolts to the chassis, then goes down and it will bolt to the block. Okay. Now what I also advise people to do is, if you have a look on the back here, you've actually got a few holes. So we've got this one for the engine harness. We've got this one down here that we've actually just attached an earth to, and you'll see down at the bottom there, if you can see that little cable hanging down there, but that is an earth bolted to the block. Okay. So remember, your biggest earth needs to be to the block because that's for your starter motor, okay? And that's where you can use this one. If you want to, you can replace it with a bigger one as well. But then I also advise on either of the cylinder heads, probably in this case on that one over there, because that one is now completely blank. You can run an earth from there. And if you remember, there's a pipe running along here where the brake booster used to go. And there's actually an earth point there where the IS200 engine used to earth. So you can use that. Go straight from there, straight to the firewall there. Bob's your uncle. Last one that you could probably add is just an earth braid sort of strap from a gearbox mounting bolt to the block to the chassis underneath as well, because that is a standard earth that was on your IS200 originally as well. Okay, right. So that's the complete layout. That's everything that needs to be connected. Obviously, it is completely plug and play. So you're just literally going to plug everything in and off you go. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pop off. We're going to get everything ready to do the testing, and then we're going to come back and do the testing. So see you in a minute. Right guys, so now we're back and ready for the testing portion. And as I said, it's going to be broken up into 2 sections. First is just with the ignition on. We're going to carry out a couple of tests. Second is going to be with the actual engine running itself. So first thing I'm going to do, we're going to go through the test that we're going to carry out. Then we'll jump into the test we're doing with the ignition. Then I'm probably going to warm up the engine first, and then we'll jump into the engine running part as well. So with just the ignition on, because it's an IS200 plug and play, we're going to do a lot of tests that are relevant to that. So first of all, we're going to have the ambient temperature or outside temperature. Again, we just want to make sure that it is reading 18 degrees. Now, our MPX analog device, unfortunately, just transmits 18 degrees all the time. It's not actually sensed by the device itself. Now, we are in the process of working on a CAN to MPX converter, or I should say we already have one, but what we need to do is write the DBC file for the particular CAN stream that's going to work with that. With that in mind, I have actually connected the ambient temperature sensor to the Link ECU, so you will be able to get that data if you had a dash display or something like that. Once we've done the physical CAN to MPX converter, these analog devices can be swapped out for the CAN one with absolutely no problems whatsoever. We obviously have an open CAN button, or not in the Storm, but in the Extreme we have an open CAN button there. If it's a Storm, then obviously we can tap into the CAN that is over there via the CAN plug that we have over there. Okay, right, so that is the ambient temperature. Check engine light, nice and simple. We're just going to go to the dash and we're going to check our check engine light over there. Then we're going to go over to the charge light. Now it's a little bit different. Our analog MPX device, that will automatically put the alternator light on if the voltage drops below 11.8 volts. What I have done though is I have actually connected the alternator lights to the ECU. So you'll see down here in DI7 there is alternator light. So what I'll do is when I put the ignition on, we should see that become active. I'll pop over, unplug it, come back and make sure that is inactive, so we know that that's working as it should do. Then we're going to have oil pressure. Now again, our little MPX analog device is converting the oil lights to the dash over there. So remember, this just does oil pressure, okay? So the low oil level, the orange one, you need to remove that light from the cluster. It's going to keep flashing. Also the old-fashioned TRC bulb, you need to remove that because that's going to keep on flashing. So while I'm here, just tell you that, okay? What I've also done is I've connected the oil pressure switch to the ECU. So you'll see over there we have DI6, which is oil pressure switch, okay? So again, I'm going to unplug the oil plug, That's going to go off. I'll plug it back in again. That's going to go on, and we'll also see the light on the dash go on as well. Okay, right. So that is the oil pressure. Then we're going to move over to the gearbox harness, and we're going to bridge the reverse plug. So we're imitating the reverse switch and make sure we get the beeping noise, so we know the circuit going all the way inside the vehicle is correct. While we're there, we're also going to do the actual speedo. So I'm going to send a speed signal to there. Now, luckily, I have actually connected the speed also to the ECU. So we should be able to see the speed come through on the ECU as well. Okay. Next up, we've got fuel pump relay. So again, I'm just going to go onto the software. We're going to activate the output, and bush, the fuel pump is going to come on. So we know that's working. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the AC system, how we control it, and obviously the fact that it's controlled completely via the ECU. And obviously we take the AC request signal through our MPX analog converter and feed it to the ECU as part of a digital input. Then what we'll do is we'll actually press the button, and we're going to hear the AC magnetic clutch relay click on and off as I do that to show you that that is working. All right. So that's all the tests with the ignition on. And when the engine's actually running, the test that we're going to be carrying out is quite simple. Basically, it's starter circuit. So again, as long as it turns over with the key, it's fine. We're looking at the tacho signal on the dash. Make sure that's right. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the coolant temp. So again, that's why I said I'm going to warm the engine up so we can see that coolant temp coming through over there. And then what I'm going to try and do is pull out all the injectors one by one. Bit of a mission on that side over there, but I'll give it a go. And then what we'll do is make sure that each and every cylinder is firing as it should. So remember, with the Storm and the X-Treme, there are 8-cylinder ignition and injection. So this engine is running fully sequential. Okay. Right, so it's a nice short one, but at the end of the video, I've got a whole series of Link engine management videos in a playlist showing you everything from loading a base map, checking base timing, how to test your inputs and your outputs and so on. So I'm not going to go into too much detail there. At the end of the video, you'll see the link for it. Click on it and you have a wealth of information there. Okay, right, so let's get into the part with the ignition now, because that's relatively straightforward. I have to warm the engine up. So as it is a plug and play, it's really straightforward. You're just going to jump in your car after you've plugged everything in, wired everything in, and you're going to turn the key on. You can hear the fuel pump is priming. So you can hear that there, and it's just going to switch off in a second, or it already has. Right, so first thing we want to do is ambient temperature. So we're going to move over to our cluster over here. And you can see there, 18 degrees. Fantastic. So that's what's always going to display on the dash itself. Just remember that actually the ambient temperature is sensed on here. So you can see analog voltage 8 is ambient temp. Okay. So again, you can get that information, just not in the actual car itself for the time being until you do the CAN converter devices. Right. Check engine light. Nice and simple. There's our check engine light in the corner there, so we know that's working exactly as it should. And remember, you are dictating the reasons the check engine light comes on inside the software of the ECU. Now, charge light, you can see our alternator light on DI7 is now activated. I'm going to pop over here. And because of our nice little sub harnesses, I'm just going to disconnect that. So I just disconnected the alternator there. Pop back over to the PC. And you can see alternator light has now turned off. Pop back over. Plug that straight in. I'm trying to do it single-handedly. Pop back over, and lo and behold, there you go, alternator light is back active again. Obviously, when we start the engine, you're going to see that's going to go off. That's absolutely fine. Right, so that is the alternator light. Oil pressure light. Okay, so you can see in the corner of the dash, we've got our red oil pressure light over there. You can see on the ECU here, we've got DI6, which is oil pressure switch, and that is now active. So again, because of our nice little sub harnesses, I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect this one. Right, so I've just disconnected that over there. Oil light's gone off on the dash, and you can see oil pressure switch has now turned to inactive on there. Pop that back in. Wash. Oil light back on the dash. Oil pressure switch back active on there. Okay. Right, so that's oil pressure light. Let's move over to the gearbox now. We're going to do the reverse and we're going to do the speed. So, really, really nice and simple. I'm just going to flick this over so long when we do the speed. But I'm just going to bridge the reverse switch, which is exactly what your car will be doing, or your gearbox will be doing. You can see that I've just bridged it, and we've got our usual annoying beep. So that tells me that all the circuits inside the car, and more specifically your reverse lights, are going to physically come on. All right. For the speedo, if you see my videos, you know I use this little device to imitate a speed signal. So I'm just going to do that now, and then you're going to see our dash is going to light up, or actually the speedo is going to move. So bear with me a second while I put it into test mode. Right, okay, so what you'll notice is it's a 3-wire sensor, so it's a Hall effect style sensor. It gets a 12 volts and a ground. The ground comes from the dash to avoid ground loops, and then I've got the signal going to the actual cluster itself. So I'm testing all 3 wires at the same time here to make sure that it's correct, and as you can see, as soon as I plug the yellow wire in, our speedo then starts to work, okay? What I'm going to do now is, as I said, we are feeding the speed to the ECU as well, okay? So hopefully if I go into my other tab here, let's go, and there you go. General purpose speed, 171, okay? And as you can see on there, so working in kilometers, you'll see it's just over 170. Obviously these harnesses, I've got this one, another one going off to Australia, so they're working in kilometers, so I have left it like that. Obviously we're in miles per hour, but you can change that if you needed to. Okay, so that's absolutely fine. So that's the speedo there. Fuel pump relay, this is going to be super simple. We're just going to go to auxiliary outputs, go to our fuel pump control, go to test, go to on, and you can actually hear the pump running there. You heard the relay click. I'm just going to turn it off. There you go, here the relay click off and the pump stops running over there. So I'm happy the ECU is controlling the fuel pump, no dramas there at all. Next up is the AC system. So I'm going to do a brief little discussion of exactly how it works, just so that you guys know exactly what's happening. There are 2 things that are happening with the AC system, right? Number 1, you have the pressure switch in the front of the vehicle. Now, that pressure switch detects when the pressure is correct. So what I mean by that, I mean if it's too high or it's too low, the switch opens, okay? So in its correct position, it closes and provides a ground, okay? That's called AC pressure switch, right? So that is connected to the ECU under DI5. Okay, now you do get the whole pin out of the ECU with the welcome pack with the harness, so you know exactly where everything is connected, but it's connected to DI5, so that's your pressure switch, okay? So that pops in, then our little device sends an AC request signal from the car. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you on there, DI4 is AC requested. At the moment it's inactive. Right, so as I come along here, press that button, you actually heard the magnetic clutch relay kick in. But you'll notice here that I've got AC request is now active. Hopefully you can see that. All right. Okay, so basically what's happening is I'm using an output to activate the magnetic clutch relay, which will then obviously send 12 volts down to our AC plug over here. Now, we're building in the safety, so basically what's happening is that output will not activate unless both the AC pressure and the AC request go active. Okay, so if you press the button and the pressure is incorrect, it will not turn on the AC pump. Everything has to work in that particular fashion. Okay, so as you can see here on my auxiliary outputs, it is a general purpose output. It's GP output 1 and it's called AC clutch. Okay, so you can see I've got it under condition 1 and 2. I've got GP input 2, which is AC request, needs to equal active, and GP input 1, AC pressure switch, needs to equal active. Okay, now you can add a third parameter. So what I mean by that is sometimes on these systems, what it would also do as well is if you put your foot flat to the floor, it turns the aircon pump off because you want to achieve maximum power. So you could basically create a third condition where basically it wouldn't turn on unless the TPS was below 90%. Okay, so that's something that you guys can do. It is open to you. It's just we do the very basic section. This is safety wise, so we're not going to activate the AC compressor if the pressure is too high or too low. Okay, so that's the AC setup over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep quiet this time and I'm going to press the AC button and you're going to hear the AC magnetic clutch relay activate. Fantastic. Okay. Right, so as I said, that'll work as long as the pressures are all okay and everything's plumbed in correctly. Right, so that's your AC request. And lastly, we did the AC clutch. All right, so that is all the testing that we're going to be doing there. Like I said, at the end of the video, I do have specific link engine management system videos on how to test all of your outputs. So that means testing all of your injectors, testing all of your coils, testing anything else that you want to test in terms of outputs like we did with the fuel pump. So I'm not going to go into massive detail with that. Obviously, after this, we're going to start the engine. So you're going to physically see that it runs and everything is gravy. And then what we'll do as part of that is I'm going to remove each injector one by one so you can see that it is physically fully sequential firing exactly as we would expect it to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop off, I'm going to start the engine up, I'm going to get a lead up to temperature just so that I can get the temperature to display on the dash because that's part of the testing that we are going to be doing. Right, so give me a second and I'll be back with you. Right guys, so now we're back and we're going to be doing the running part of the test, which I know is probably what you all like to see. Obviously the engine running, making sure that everything is nice and smooth and working as it should. So quick recap, because the starting part is very limited. We don't go through an awful lot. As I said, I've got the end of the video. I've got a link to our whole link engine management playlist with all the bits and bobs we normally do to do all the testing. But today we're just going to be making sure that it starts. So we're going to turn the key, starter should engage, and obviously the motor should fire up. Then we're going to go look at the tacho signal to make sure that that's coming through on the dash. So that's all correct. Then we're going to look at the coolant temp. So as I've warmed the engine up already, we should be seeing the coolant temp on the gauge there. And then lastly, I'm going to go around and pull out each injector one by one, and that's going to show us that each cylinder is firing. Now, obviously I'm doing this. I would advise you before even firing up to go to the other videos and see how you can test your outputs for your injectors and your coils as well. Okay, right, so let's get into it because it's not that much to do. So what we're going to do quickly is just put the key in the ignition. We're going to turn it on. You can hear the pump is priming there. And let's go to start it. So 1, 2, 3. Right here. Okay, that's the starter circuit. That's working okay. Okay, we can see we've got RPM over there. So it should be about 1,000. Or it has dropped a little bit there. So you can see that it's about just below 1,000 or about 1,000 there. So that's absolutely fine. Alright, coolant temp, let's pop back over to the coolant temp. And there you go, you can see it is dead on center there. It's about 80 and 90 degrees if I'm not mistaken. So it's about 86 degrees, so that's more or less where we'd like to see it. Right, so let's move over to the injector. So I'm going to start on this side because it's nice and easy. So we'll start with number 1, number 3, number 5, number 7. Right, let's move over to the other side over here. We've got number 2. Let's go to number 8. Well, I'm going to try number 6. Wiggle that off. Alright, this is the tough one now. I'm going to try and get underneath there. Go. Push that back in again. That's all perfect. Okay, so it all revs up nicely. Pops back down to a nice idle, so that is absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go kill the car. Okay. Right, so as you can see, she runs perfectly. Everything is going exactly as we expect it to. So that's absolutely fine. So she should be able to just plug this straight in the customer and get the engine fired up. Now, few caveats. Number 1, always check the base timing. You can see I have physically started this engine on there, and this customer will get their space map on their ECU. But trust and verify. Okay, so I would still advise, even though you've seen it run here, that you check your base timing. Okay, so you can see your marks down there. So you've got 0, 5, 10, and 15. You can lock the timing at 10 degrees on the ECU. You can then check your base timing with a timing light and make sure you are happy with that. Okay, so it's one check that I always advise to do, even if you've physically seen an engine running. All right, check base timing. No questions asked. Okay, next up, I would still test all of the outputs on your engine. It can also lead you to a problem. So if one of your injectors is stuck, testing the outputs will be a good way to go, hang on a second, it worked in the video, it worked 100% there, but now I've got it here and now my injector doesn't work. Right, move the connector to the next injector. Does it work? Yes, boom, then you know you've got a problem with your injector. So those are incredibly helpful tools for you guys to use to obviously get the engine started as quickly as possible. Okay, right, so that is all the testing we're going to be doing today. So again, as I said, this is a brand new harness, so hopefully you guys do like it. Okay, let us know what you think in the comment section. Do you think it's a good idea to have a harness that works with both the Storm and the X-Treme? Personally, I do, but obviously I'd like to hear your guys' opinions on that. We are actually working on one to work with the Atom and the Monsoon. So again, let me know if you'd like to see that. I have actually done the design already, but obviously I haven't had anybody that's opted to go for that yet. So if you are interested in something like that, please give us a shout and we will be able to price that up for you. All right. So again, thanks for watching, guys. Garth, obviously this is your harness. Let's get it boxed up. We've got to get it off to you in Australia so you can get your IS200 1UZ all fired up. If you have any questions, Garth, again, feel free to contact us. Like I said, hopefully this video is super helpful. You will be getting all of this documentation as well. So it'll tell you what all the pinouts are. All right. Okay, depending on what ECU you've got, because you've got the Storm. Okay, that's the X-Treme if you swap over. Then I've also got all of the pinouts for the 2 expansion plugs. So it's the 6-pin one, which unfortunately only one is relevant on yours, which is digital 8, so digital input. And then obviously the pedal harness at the back, again, only available on the X-Treme. But I must advise it's using analog 3 and 4, and it's got a 5 volt and a signal ground. So in theory, if you wanted to use it for something else that required a 0 to 5 volt signal, then you can feel free to use that particular plug over there. Okay, but for everybody else, thanks for watching. All right, we'll see you again soon. I got to do another one of the exact same, so I'm going to pop straight into that, and then we will be back and see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.